All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Today, we're going to decode the absolutely incredible architecture of the female reproductive system and, just as importantly, the fascinating surgeries we use to fix it. We are going to look really closely at everything from the intricate anatomical layers that make human life possible, all the way to the brilliant surgical techniques medical professionals rely on when things, well, don't exactly go according to plan. It's a truly fascinating look at the raw mechanics of life and the sheer human ingenuity required to protect it.
To make sense of all this, here is our game plan. 1. We'll decode OB/GYN terminology. 2. Map the reproductive anatomy. 3. Trace the timeline of childbirth. 4. Dive into obstetric surgeries. And finally, 5. Look at gynecological procedures.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Decoding OB/GYN Terminology. Okay, so it's actually incredibly easy to remember these two common medical terms once you know the trick. Gravida just refers to the number of times a person has been pregnant. An easy way to remember this? Just think of the heavy gravity of pregnancy pulling down that extra weight. On the flip side, para is the number of times a person has actually given birth. A really great memory trick here is to associate para with becoming a parent through the birthing process. So to put that into perspective, someone who has had miscarriages might have a higher gravida number than their para number. And what about twins? Well, it's a single pregnancy and a single birthing process, so for twins, it just counts as one gravida and one para. Here are two more vital terms you're going to see a lot on patient charts. It really helps to notice that both share the meno root, which, you guessed it, refers to menstruation. But you have to remember that dysmenorrhea is all about the painful cramps. Think of the dys prefix as pointing to something bad or painful. Menorrhagia, however, deals specifically with a really heavy or prolonged flow. Knowing this exact difference is absolutely crucial because it helps surgeons pinpoint exactly what kind of intervention a patient might need later down the line. Moving right along to Section 2, Mapping the Reproductive Anatomy.
So the uterus is actually made of 3 distinct layers. You've got the inner endometrium, that's the layer that swells up every single month to accept a fertilized egg, then the thick, muscular middle layer called the myometrium, and the outer perimetrium. But here's the thing. A heavy, muscular organ like the uterus doesn't just, float around freely in the body. It's held perfectly in place by this complex, high-tension network of ligaments. You have the cardinal and uterus sacral ligaments anchoring the base, the sweeping broad ligaments, and honestly, my favorite structural feature, the round ligaments. These literally curve all the way around the urinary bladder to attach right to the front of the abdominal cavity. It is a true marvel of biological suspension.
Now, as we look closer at this anatomy, we have to talk about the term adnexa. Whenever you hear the word adnexa, just think next to. It simply refers to the vital surrounding neighborhood of the main organ. So in the case of the uterus, its adnexa includes the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, and the surrounding ligaments. And there's a fascinating detail here about how the fallopian tubes connect to the ovaries. Actually, scratch that. They aren't completely fused together at all. The tubes end in these tiny finger-like projections called fimbria. So when an ovary releases an egg, these fimbria actively funnel and scoop that egg right up into the fallopian tube. Moving to the exterior, the term vulva encompasses all the external structures. And we have to be careful not to confuse this with the vagina, which is the internal tube-like structure. The vulva includes the labia majora and minora, the mons pubis, and the vestibule, which contains both the urethral and vaginal openings. But what I really want to highlight here is the clitoral complex. The visible glans is quite literally just the tip of the iceberg. This complex actually extends far deeper internally than most people realize. It has these wings of erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum, exact same tissue as in a penis, that wrap right around the urethra and vagina, completely packed with an extensive, highly sensitive network of nerve endings. All right, let's jump to Section 3, the timeline of childbirth.
This progression is literally a rapid-fire, breathtaking development of cellular life. For the first 2 weeks, we start with a zygote. This is essentially just a cluster of rapidly dividing non-differentiated precursor cells. Then, around week 3, we enter the embryonic stage. This is a huge deal because it's when the foundational architecture, the spine, the head, the limb buds, is first laid down. Finally, around week 9, we officially transition to a fetus. At this crucial stage, specific genes really turn on, and the body finally tunes its specific cells, like heart and bone cells, clearly taking on a recognizable human form.
And at the end of that intense 40-week journey, we hit labor. Now, the key takeaway here is that birth itself is only stage 2. Stage 1 is dilation, where the cervix has to expand from practically nothing all the way to 10 centimeters.
To put that into perspective, that's roughly the diameter of a bagel. And that process alone can take anywhere from 2 to 12 grueling hours. Then comes stage 2, the actual birth and delivery of the infant. But guess what? The marathon of labor isn't truly over yet. Stage 3 involves the necessary expulsion of the placenta. And finally, stage 4 is a vital, hours-long recovery period where the patient's exhausted bodily systems finally, slowly begin to stabilize.
That brings us to Section 4, obstetric surgeries and interventions.
Sometimes nature needs a little help, and these two interventions are entirely about anatomical control. During birth, the tissues stretch immensely, but occasionally it's just not quite enough. Instead of risking a highly unpredictable, dangerous tear straight toward the rectum, a surgeon might perform an episiotomy. This is a controlled, slightly lateral incision of the perineum designed to safely expand the opening. But what if the body starts opening way too early? If a patient has what's called an incompetent cervix that starts dilating prematurely, surgeons step in with a cervical cerclage. They literally use a rubber band or a purse string suture to securely tie the cervix shut, keeping the baby safely inside until it's actually time for labor.
We absolutely have to address severe obstetric emergencies too. An ectopic pregnancy happens when a fertilized egg mistakenly implants outside the uterine lining, maybe stuck in the fallopian tube, or in rare cases, even on the abdominal wall. Because this is never a viable pregnancy and will cause catastrophic internal damage if it keeps growing, immediate surgical removal is quite literally the only way to save the mother's life. Then we have placenta previa. This occurs when the egg implants very low in the uterus. As the placenta grows, it completely covers the cervix. Because the cervix is designed to stretch and open, having a highly vascular placenta sitting right over it creates a terrifying risk of massive hemorrhage. This almost always requires a highly controlled C-section.
And speaking of C-sections, the surgical precision required here is just mind-blowing. A cesarean usually starts with a transverse Pfannenstiel incision. That's that slightly curved line low across the pelvis. Because the urinary bladder sits directly over the uterus, surgeons actually have to use a special bladder retractor to pull it safely out of the way. When they are finally ready to cut into the uterus, they swap to specialized Lister scissors. Why? Because these have blunt, rounded tips to ensure the fetus inside isn't accidentally nicked. And here's a crazy fact. Unlike most surgeries, a C-section requires 3 separate instrument counts. One when closing the extra organ, the uterus, one for the abdomen, and one for the skin.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, gynecological procedures and repairs.
Hysterectomies are incredibly common, but they're often misunderstood. The procedure actually scales up in intensity based on medical necessity. It starts with a subtotal hysterectomy, which removes just the upper uterus but intentionally preserves the cervix. A total hysterectomy takes both the uterus and the cervix. If we need to go further and add a bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, we are now removing the uterus, cervix, both fallopian tubes, and both ovaries. And finally, for the most severe cases, like spreading cancer, a radical Wertheim's procedure removes all of those organs plus the adjoining pelvic tissues.
Now this right here is a brilliantly simple surgical solution to a very painful problem. Remember those Bartholin's glands near the vaginal opening that provide essential lubrication? Well, sometimes their tiny ducts can get blocked, causing really painful, infected cysts. Instead of just lancing it or trying to clear out a microscopic duct, surgeons use a technique called marsupialization. They literally suture the walls of the cyst open to the labial skin, creating a permanent, kangaroo-like pouch. This ingenious little structural change ensures the gland can continuously drain naturally without ever getting sealed shut again. It's a total game changer.
To treat issues like dangerously heavy bleeding, polyps, or to safely clear leftover uterine contents after a miscarriage, doctors generally rely on a couple of primary options. They can perform a DNC, that stands for dilation and curettage, where they mechanically scrape the endometrial lining away using specific tools called curettes. Or, for chronic bleeding issues like the menorrhagia we talked about earlier, they can perform an endometrial ablation. This is a super advanced technique where, instead of scraping, they completely destroy the problematic tissue using extreme heat, hot water, microwaves, or even specialized freezing probes like the HER option. Our final stop involves structural repairs known as colporrhaphy. Over time, sometimes the fascia and vaginal walls weaken, which causes the surrounding organs to literally bulge or herniate straight into the vaginal space. If it's the bladder pushing in from the front, it's called a cystocele. If it's the rectum pushing in from the back, it's a rectocele. Surgeons go in and reinforce those walls, often pulling the fascia together or using medical mesh to push the organs right back into their proper anatomical neighborhood. Very often, they'll actually fix both the anterior and posterior walls in a single, comprehensive procedure.
As we marvel at the resilient, high-tension architecture of the female body and the truly breathtaking surgical ingenuity we use to repair it, it really puts the vast complexity of human biology into perspective. From purse-string sutures on a cervix to literally freezing the walls of a uterus, the tools we have at our disposal today are just astounding. But it leaves us with one massive question. What incredible medical frontiers will we conquer next to protect those who bring life into this world? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating anatomy with me today. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.